all, the battle to save Sally B. I was numb with shock. Sally B was far up at the head of the beach, lying almost completely over on her side amongst the big boulders. Sea water was coming in over her gunnels, and she was rapidly filling with water. My first reaction was that nothing could be done, but then I thought I should try to rescue electrical equipment such as the radio and depth sounder. Also, I wanted to remove the compass and get my tools out of the forward cuddy. It felt the only positive action I could take. The tide was coming in fast, so while I was wading about in the wheelhouse grabbing my toolbox and some floating cans of oil, Robert quickly pumped up the deflated dinghy. By now I was up to my waist in water, found a screwdriver and was feverishly unscrewing the radio and any other electrical appliance I could get my hand. The water was up to chest level, and I was handing stuff to Robert through the wheelhouse door. He had waded out to me, towing the dinghy behind him so he could load up the Avon with any items I had managed to salvage. Finally, we somewhat swam away from Sally B to the shore, and the pair of us sat on the beach side by side, soaking wet, watching her slowly submerge below the waterline. Eventually, all that showed was a corner of the cabin roof and her aerial mast. I was completely devastated. I felt as if I had just let my most loyal friend down in front of me. Worst of all, I knew it was my own fault. I should have made the extra effort to get the dinghy out to check the ropes properly. I was really grieving. Sally B was my lifeline, my source of income, and the symbol of my independence. Robert put his arms around me and said all the kinds of comforting, encouraging things you would imagine. She would soon be back working again, better than before. We would work on that together. What was really amazing was he genuinely believed what he was saying. And because he believed it could be done, I believed it too. Instead of walking away from the disaster in defeat and despair, we left energetically, discussing what we could do next to get her upright. I had seen a boat righted once using a load of buoys, so we set off for home, planning to have something to eat and then grab as many floats, buoys and drums as we could. We would wait for low tide and then somehow, and we hadn't thought exactly how, get them under her. Back home, while we were discussing our options over something to eat, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Anne looking very concerned. She had taken a dog for a stroll to the harbour that evening and saw that Sally B had sunk. I explained what we were planning to do. She simply nodded and went away, but I was very touched by her concern. Ingenuity and teamwork were essential to island survival. I discovered that right from the beginning, and I have kept on rediscovering it ever since. Well, we didn't have money, or just at that moment anyway, the organisational inspiration, but we did have determination. Around midnight, armed with as many buoys as we could carry, along with rope, tilly lamps, a flask of hot tea and a couple of decent torches, Robert, Jan, his sister and I headed for the harbour. When we got there, the tide still had a long way to go before we could start bailing out Sally B. I didn't even know what kind of damage the rocks had inflicted on her. 5 minutes after we reached Sally B, we heard the sound of approaching feet and voices. Gordon and Anne and my neighbours had arrived to see if they could help. I just couldn't believe it. They were running boat trips between Algon and Lockeroos regularly, so we'd have to make an early start the following morning for a full day's work on Kaylee Jane. Yet here they were, offering their support. When the tide was fully ebbed and Sally B finally exposed, we started bailing her out. We also tipped bucket after bucket of fresh water from a nearby burn over the engine to try to reduce the inevitable corrosion that salt water would cause. After a lot of bailing, she was eventually completely free of water, both salt and fresh. She lay over on her starboard gunwale with her keel jammed between two large boulders. Miraculously, the rocks had missed her propeller by centimetres. Only the iron safety bar that had been bent and twisted a little out of true. Even her vulnerable wooden rudder was intact. In the glow of several hissing tilly lamps, she looked like a dead thing. I realised that my idea of raising her upright with buoys had been over-optimistic. Even with the 5 of us, it would be impossible to move her a single inch to get anything underneath her. If we could not find a way to shift Sally B, then she would have to stay where she was until the tide turned and she would fill with water again. Not only was she lying too far over on her starboard side, but she was also wedged hard into the surrounding boulders. It seemed more and more likely that she was holed, but at this stage none of us could see where. Even as my sluggish brain was beginning to work this out, Gordon asked me if I knew how much Sally B weighed. I guessed she was between a ton and a ton and a half. The BT winch might just get her up, he said. I was willing to try anything, so Gordon suggested we cleared rocks away from a huge boulder further up the beach, enough to be able to get a substantial change around while he went to get the winch. Anne, Jan, Robert and I got busy clearing rocks and stones, and Gordon headed towards the BT windmills at the top of the hill. As the island's BT engineer, Gordon was used to winching the windmills up and down for general maintenance. He not only knew where the winch was kept, but also how to use it. Clearing rocks and stones at 2 or 3 in the morning is not much fun, but time was of the essence and we worked fast. At some point, Jan went all the way back to Lech Moor to fetch a pickaxe so we could hack out a better purchase for the chain. Gordon soon returned with the BT winch, some heavy-duty chain and ropes. With his added help, working on the boulder, it was finally ready to hold the winch. The winch, when used to lower or raise the windmill, is normally bolted to a concrete block. However, we had to make do with a chain to secure it to this large rock. We got more ropes and somehow managed to feed them under and around Sally B's hull and tie them to the length of chain that came from the winch. Slowly Gordon started to crank the lever of the winch. With each turn a few links of the chain passed through the gears, and finally it straightened and became taut. For a while it looked as if nothing was happening. Sally B was just too heavy and wedged too hard into the rocks to move. Then we saw her shift just a little, then a little more. Incredibly, she was slowly coming upright. As soon as there was enough space between her and the boulders, the rest of us started to back floats and buoys under her, trying to support her as she rose. At around 4:30 in the morning, she had been raised enough for us to see what damage she had suffered. A sharp, pyramid-shaped rock had staved in 3 of her planks on her starboard side, low down, near to her prow. Although I didn't know it until I got a chance to look in the forecastle later, she had broken 7 or 8 ribs as well. With even more incredible ingenuity, Gordon went back to his workshop and returned with a sack filled with anything he could put his hands on to make a temporary patch for the hole. Inside the sack were newspapers, mastic for fixing leaks in corrugated roofing, a tin of tar, glue, nails and a piece of old heartboard. He crunched bits of newspaper and packed them tightly into the hole, then filled it roughly with glue, mastic and tar. On top of that he tacked the hardboard. He'd made her temporarily watertight, so all we had to do was wait for the tide to come in so she could be floated off. By this time it was close to sunrise and we no longer needed the light of the tilly lamps. As the tide lapped around her, she finally floated free of the rocks and we could tow her to a safer position. We were all completely exhausted. Robert had gone back to Glenfield to pick up some item an hour or so before Sally B lifted free. He got to the house, sat down for just a moment and promptly fell asleep with his head on the kitchen table. When I got there to find out why he was delayed, he was too tired to wake, so I left him where he was and went back down to the harbour. I got there just as Gordon and I were towing Sally B with their dinghy beyond the old stone pier, where she was infinitely safer. We tied her off and left her for the time being. Incredibly, after their night of heavy activity saving my boat, Gordon and Anne still went and did their usual tour trips in the Cayley Jane that day. In Glenfield there were 3 totally worn out people. We had lost 1 entire night's sleep, and the night before that had not been much better. On top of all that, Robert and Jan had not had the chance to recover from their long drive. We lay on our respective beds, but I could not sleep or rest. My feelings of complete failure were all pervasive, and I couldn't stop the accusations going around my head. I was already projecting into the future and the knock-on effects of losing Sally B. She was my linchpin, the source of my independence and livelihood on Soay. Without her, I could not pick up or sell my winkles, get coal, wood, hen food, or collect friends and family from Elgol. I would have to revert to the goodwill of my neighbours, who were far fewer than when I had arrived 9 years earlier. My biggest concern was income. I had hardly any reserve funds for a crisis like this. I certainly did not have enough money to get Sally B fixed at a boatyard or to simply buy another boat. She wasn't even insured. My good luck had finally run out, and for the first time since I had arrived on the island, I saw that I might have to throw in the towel and go back to civilization. I always knew that I was on borrowed time living the way I did, but I hated the idea of giving up. I was looking the reality of defeat in the face, and it was not at all welcome. Even though I was completely wrapped up in my personal feelings of loss, failure and fears of what this meant for my future on Soay, I could still appreciate the huge support and empathy I had found in Robert. He was an honest, decent, kind and sincere man. I began to realise that the warm relationship we had both been so comfortable with for so long was much, much more than friendship. I had been a fool not to see before this moment that we were in love. The death of Sally B brought us together in a way that may have happened anyway in time, but it was certainly a catalyst to a new and deeper relationship. It also helped to galvanise my determination to get Sally B going again. With Robert's encouragement and support behind me, it felt possible. I also had, and still have, a tremendous sense of gratitude and respect for Anne and Gordon, who went so far beyond the ordinary in giving their indispensable aid, expertise, and tireless energy to help a distressed neighbour. Without them, my boat would still be rotting where it lay today. You learn a lot about people in times of trouble, and I was about to learn a lot more.